We are live.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another Kalicube Tuesdays. Today is quite a special one. We've got Anton on screen to start with. Welcome, Anton. You're in Kyiv right now.
I am in Kyiv, well, unfortunately, or whatever. I don't know what to say. They just bombed Kyiv television tower. Tower stays, but TV signal disappear. It's what they say. I don't use television, so it doesn't affect me, but well, yeah. It does affect everyone, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's a really sad situation to be talking to you like this, but how are you feeling, and how is it generally? How are you feeling the mood in Kyiv?
Yeah, place where I live is a boring suburb. You've been here actually. Yep. boring suburb of Kyiv. Very boring place. Nothing happening, and I wish it stays this way. So it is now this way. So we hear sirens, not all the time, but we hear very distant explosions, very distant. So far so good. Shops are open. We have internet, as you can see. We have electricity, obviously, and running water and everything. Obviously, we don't know how long it stays this way, but so far wasn't that bad here where I am. But in some other place, we're much worse, unfortunately.
Yeah. And one of the toughest things, if I remember at the beginning, was getting some sleep. And now it's okay. You're managing to sleep. I mean, I can imagine it being incredibly difficult to sleep.
No, sleep is no problem. The problem is every night is a sirens. So air attack of whatever. Not here, but just genuine in Kyiv somewhere. So we go to makeshift shelter, which is a communal corridor, and it's two big concrete walls from each side. So kind of, well, it's the best what we can, and it's not very convenient to sleep there. And if you go when they said okay, go off. And maybe in 15 minutes time again. So in night time we just sleep there, and closer to the morning we're moving back to flat. So far it was like that. But as I said, so far it's all only scary and psychological because there were no bombs on shore here, but in many other places were plenty of them. I decided not giving anyone information I don't see myself personally, because you can go to, I don't know, CNN or BBC site and probably find much more information, because it's obviously I only can say what I personally can see.
Right. And I mean, for today, I was thinking about cancelling it, and you said let's have a bit of normalcy.
Yeah.
That's important.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna remove myself from a screen because we had enough of that, or hopefully enough, and let's get back to kind of normality, because we do need a normality. You can't sit all day and be scared. You probably just go crazy. Yeah. So let's get to normality. Talk about something else. Okay, guys. Cheers.
See you later, man. Thanks a lot. Stay safe. Now, I just wanted to really quickly have a word. My relationship with Kyiv and Ukraine started with Anton 3 or 4 years ago. He invited me over. I stayed in a floating hotel just off an island with a deserted fun park in the middle of winter. It was incredibly bizarre, in the middle of the river that goes through Ukraine. And Anton welcomed me incredibly and introduced me to people like Alessia Korobka. And then I met Eugene as well, who's over there on the right. And these 3 pictures are these 3 people who I love dearly, taken in Ukraine yesterday or this morning. And I think it's really important to remember that real people fighting for their real freedom, people we know, people we love, who are standing up to Russia, fighting for their freedom. Let's help them. Please do stand with Ukraine. And Eugene, the guy on the right there, has given me a lot of really reliable resources and information. He's been feeding me over the last week with this information, which is what I've been tweeting and Facebooking, including this site that gives you all the different ways you can help, different ways you can support Ukraine that have been verified, so that you're sure that you're giving to the right places and helping with the right things. I've put a link up there, not very short link, but it's shorter than the link that they gave. So hopefully that will enable you to go and help our friends in Ukraine who are fighting for their freedom right now. Thank you. Now on with the show for a bit of normality with Stephan. Welcome, Stephan. How are you doing?
Hey, Jason. How are you?
I'm all right. You get the song. A quick hello and we're good to go. Welcome to the show, Stephan Bajaio. I got stuck on your first name instead of the second one.
Listen, most people don't get my first or my last name right, so I appreciate it nonetheless. Not to stay on the previous topic, but I do want to just quickly say, for myself personally, I have many friends in the Ukraine. Conductor, the company I helped build for 14 years, has over 50 individuals working in the Ukraine. Luckily, they've gone ahead and relocated half of the folks, but there's still at least 25, I believe, employees and their families that are still in Ukraine, all throughout the country. Many in Kyiv. My heart goes out to them. I think about them literally every day, every hour, actually. If ultimately Anatoly or Lessig or Alex Sliffin end up seeing this recording, I just want to let you guys know I love you. I'm thinking of you. I can't imagine having to take up arms to defend my country, but I respect you beyond all belief, and my love and my heart goes out to you. As for what you said, Jason, regarding supporting Ukrainians, I 100% believe in all the causes that Jason has vetted, and I think you all should look to provide any treasure, talent, or time that you can to these causes as well. If you know any individuals that have crossed the border and now find themselves in a new nation and need help, and you're wondering, well, how do I help them potentially? If you can actually get in touch with actual individuals. You can always use your credit card and go and buy them a hotel room for a night, or buy them a meal, or do many of the other things you might want to try to do. So there's many ways I think we can think outside the box and help. We should obviously go the traditional route, but there's lots of things we can think about.
A great point. Eugene was saying to me yesterday that one of the things he's asked me to do is help find French lawyers who will help pro bono with people coming from Ukraine who have to deal with the paperwork in French that they obviously don't understand, to make sure they get the paperwork right so that they can stay for a decent period of time and rebuild something before either staying or going back to Ukraine. So I think these are things we don't necessarily think about, but the refugee crisis is going to get increasingly difficult. And helping with that is going to be incredibly important.
You're so right. Most people don't think of lawyers as a place to go and help, but think that right now we're only dealing with, I say only, hundreds of thousands. There are speculations there will be millions of refugees in this process. So this is not a overnight thing. This is something we have to think about. And while it's just happened, frankly, even though it doesn't feel like it's just happened, I'm sure to the Ukrainians, it's important that we think about this and being in this for the long haul and helping them, not just today, not just tomorrow, but a month from now, 2 months from now, a year from now, as they look to rebuild once they take their country back.
Brilliant. Well said. Now, let's get back to normality for 30 minutes, talking about supply and demand. I'm going to sing the song again because then I can do the podcast from it. A quick hello and we're good to go. Welcome to the show, Stephan Bajaio.
Well, thank you for having me, Jason. I really appreciate it.
Welcome. This is going to be delightful. We've been talking about supply and demand, but before we do that, I'm going to show you your brand SERP. And the first thing I did was try to find your KGM ID. And here we have your KGM ID. And as you can see on the left, we have the KGM ID showing the results that are exactly the same as the results that Google shows for your name. And that implies or suggests that Google has fully understood who you are. You just don't have a knowledge panel yet. And I love finding those because those are the basics, the foundation on which you can build a knowledge panel pretty easily. So you're well on the way. And then we were talking about this, which is on your results page. Looking down the bottom, we've got these videos, and you were suggesting that maybe that video of this podcast or this Kalicube Tuesdays appears because it's in a time-sensitive piece of information that your audience would be interested in. Do you want to expand on that?
Sure. I mean, much like much like we used to talk about query deserves freshness. So if folks don't know what that term means, I'm sure many of them do, because many of the folks that follow you are advanced. But I know there are probably some newbies in the audience. Query deserves freshness is this idea that a query itself, if you were to look up, for example, tsunami Japan, it would show you the most recent tsunami, not one that had happened 100 years ago. The same probably holds true with the way Google wants to show the most recent videos it believes or has high confidence are relevant to the individual. So not surprising to find that there. I think the question is, really how much content are you actually having associated with your name? And then also I would also assume that the domain authority, so to speak, of who the even though it might be on a YouTube channel, who is actually publishing that will play a factor as to whether it shows up. If it's the only video that just showed up on a new YouTube channel, I'm not sure that its recency is going to make that big a difference in showing up in the SERPs for you.
Right. Yeah, no, that's really interesting from my perspective, because we've been doing this for a year and a half, Kalicube Tuesdays, every single Tuesday, as the name suggests. And what I've seen is Google has triggered knowledge panels increasingly quickly. We've got it down to something like 17 minutes between the moment we publish an event and getting the knowledge panel. But we're also seeing that we tend to, how can I put it, trespass upon your people's brand SERPs when our guests are on, both before and after. And that consistency and that, I would say, entity authority, Google's understood who we are, it's understood what the event is, and potentially that's going to be driving that presence, which is, getting in the way of your good name. I'm really sorry about that.
I wouldn't say that at all. In fact, I'd say quite the opposite. And I know that was a tongue in cheek, but think about this. And I think we'd have to talk about this more on someone who has information or videos being published about them every single week, right?
Right.
So the frequency also should play into a factor as to, if we were thinking of it as, since you're publishing this and it sees within 17 minutes, it's obviously crawling and taking that information and realizing that you do that on a consistent basis. Therefore, it knows you're a trusted source and is willing to provide that quickly. Yet an individual, so to come in, I'm not having 100 videos about me up a week, and then you're imposing yours into the mix. So you're probably the most frequently crawled entity that is now talking about me right now. The other things that have videos about me are maybe my YouTube channel. They might be, things, webinars I've been a part of, so on and so forth. Those are not constantly updating. So Google's need to see that and recognize that and say, oh, this is fresh, isn't the same as someone else's. So I would say yours probably plays a factor because of the consistency. That's an assumption, but it's the same thing we think about when we think about the novelty of content and the frequency of content on a website. So I kind of look at it the same way.
Right, yeah. I mean, the idea of consistency, since before we did Kalicube Tuesdays, I was just publishing podcasts as and when I could be bothered to bounce them down in terms of sound. I would record them in groups of 12 and then push them out as I felt like it. Well, I was doing them at conferences when I met people. I would just interview them, so I get 12 in a conference. And this has been consistent, and it brings me back to the Buwan Koala days, who delightfully, and I've only just realized this, are blue and yellow. It's a blue dog and a yellow koala. Buwan Koala would have been the best guests for this particular episode today. And what we did was we published every single month. And what we found was that the kids who were playing with Buwan Koala on the site, that consistently was incredibly important. And that brings me back to my favorite analogy. Google is a child. It loves consistency. It wants to learn. It loves repetition. We need to bear that in mind. And it loves new stuff. It loves fresh new stuff, and it gets overexcited. So the more I look at Google as a child, the more comfortable I feel with the job that I'm doing, trying to educate it as opposed to trying to trick it. Now, that takes us on to supply and demand. This is your theory, and I'm an economist. So supply and demand, I go, ooh, that's interesting. But what do you mean by supply? And then what do you mean by demand? Let's start with supply.
Sure. I want to go the other way, actually, because we say supply and demand because that's how we've always thought of it, right? But I've actually flipped it. And the reason why, just to give a little bit of background for folks. So I've worked in the enterprise SEO space for 15 to 20 years, meaning I've sat with CMOs of the largest companies in the world, And I've also struggled trying to convince many an organization to build out SEO teams, build out SEO practices, invest in SEO. And in doing so, I found, a lot of the time, the individual who's trying to get that point across is doing so without getting to the business metrics. They're not talking supply and demand. They're not using terms they might use the term canonical, right? Which raises more wristwatches than it does eyebrows. So in reality, when I think of supply and demand, or in this case, demand and supply, first I think of Google in a different way. I think most people look at Google as an attempt to rank, at least in SEO. And that's very egotistical because we're looking at it from our brand specifically, right? My intention is to make myself show up in the search results.
Right.
We use demand as a proxy for that. So we look at search volume for however we can argue its tenets on a whole other show on how accurate that is. But we do look at the way people search. And if we understand the way people search, then we understand their demand. What is it they're really looking for? Now, I don't mean just the product. I mean the problems they express, the things they share. One of my favorite lines is nobody lies to their search bar. And it's so true, right? You will tell that search bar things you wouldn't tell your spouse, things you wouldn't tell your rabbi, your priest, anything you will put into that search bar. Meaning we don't have the specific data tied back to Jason. I don't want to see his search results. But we do have the ability to understand the way in which people are expressing themselves. Now, as a business, we should be very attuned to that demand. Traditionally, all we do is say, oh, well, we have a product. It's our job to drive demand for it. That's what marketing originally was, right? In this case, we have a problem. We have a demand. How are we serving that? But not just how are we serving that, who's serving that? So that takes us to the other side of the search bar.
Brilliant.
The SERPs. The SERPs, the search engine result page, is filled with supply. That's as if you just walked into a store with an idea of what you wanted, and you were given a share of shelf, right? There's a shelf there, and you can see all the different things on the shelf. That will formulate, I've always said, the search engine results are either confirming a bias you have, they are introducing you to something you didn't realize, or they're confusing you to the point that you need to find more information.
Right. Yeah. Which then triggers a new search to find more information.
Exactly. So if I believe that because I've been in the industry for 20 years and I know all the players in the SEO space, and I query Google myself, knowing someone a good amount of how this all works, right? And I see a brand pop up there. A brand pops up I've never heard of in the top 10. I, in some way, shape, or form, question slightly, well, where did these guys come from? I didn't know these guys. Are they new on the scene? What's going on? Maybe I'm unattuned to something I thought. Now, repeat that through 5, 6, 7 different searches. If I see that same brand pop up, all of a sudden, they've been in the supply so frequently that I start to question whether or not I was right in my 20 years of knowledge, or if I missed something.
And that kind of is that really important point of the SERP is also a branding opportunity, and obsessing about clicks is wonderful, but just the branding opportunity is already quite powerful, especially when you've got those multiple touches, if you can dominate a sector.
Yeah, and it's confirmation bias, right? So when you think about it, and it's funny, I actually was talking with someone the other day, and I showed them, I think it was a G2 page for their product, right? And they said to me, well, those are not really my competitors. Right. I said, hold on a second. It doesn't matter if they're your competitors or not. The perception, depending on which queries are driving that particular G2 page, for example, which if you don't know, G2 is a review site. So having a review site that gives you and your maybe not correct competitors side by side is educating an audience as to whether or not they should consider you or someone else. If you haven't looked at the reviews you have on that site and ensure that that page actually has great reviews, you're doing yourself a disservice, because it doesn't matter whether they're right or wrong. It just matters that this will be consumed by an audience who has an interest in your brand. So if they're not seeing the best face of you and you're choosing to ignore that, you're doing yourself harm. You just can't say, oh, well, that's not right, and we'll just say, forget it, because while you forget it, others are consuming it. that conversation happens no matter what.
Right. And yeah, and I think kind of people forget you've got to look pretty on the SERP, and we all focus on those kind of rich snippets that we get. But it's also things like the thumbnails that we just saw for the video that we've got ranking for you. That's a beautiful thumbnail, and we spend a lot of time looking at that graphic design. My ex-wife did it, and I love it. And it's got these bright colors, it's got readable text, and our brand, when people see it, looks, from my perspective at least, great. Another thing you just said is Google's educating its audience through the search results page. So we're now in a situation where, from my perspective, as brands, we need to educate Google about who we are, what we do, and who our audience might be. And by proxy, we're then educating the people on the other side, our audience, through Google. So our appearance on Google and how we appear on Google and the content we put onto Google is incredibly important.
Yeah, this is a topic I've talked about for years, literally. I think I first coined this phrase in 2011, called SPI, Search Presence Intelligence. And what it is this concept that, you should be using the SERP throughout your entire business, much like you should be using the demand. So if we think about the supply, what is being provided as supply should go right back into your business intelligence. Let's take that down, kind of a thought process for a moment.
A rabbit hole, you mean?
Sure, I'm a big rabbit. I like to go down rabbit holes. So think of it this way. If you do a query and all of a sudden some publishers show up, and it's for a term you obviously want to rank for, but you don't outrank the publisher because the publisher could be Forbes. Well, that Forbes page that might be ranking #1 that has display options, right? So I guess as the display person, are they cognizant of that? Have you taken that URL, put it into any one of the SEO products and actually look to see what the estimated traffic to that page is, meaning eyeballs that are relevant to your brand are now finding their way there. Now you would, programmatically normally hope that you hit that page and so forth and so on. But if there's a specific page out there, have you done something? If a Quora result shows up, someone's asking a question. It has to do with a conversation you should be part of. Does your social team know about it? And this is where I traditionally get into, especially there's two kind of issues with the strategy and why it doesn't happen, pun intended, organically within organizations. In large companies, it's silos, just a bunch of silos, right? You've got your SEO person here who's trying to convince everyone else to listen to them. And then you've got, you've got your social person and your display person. They all might live in digital marketing in a large organization, but they all have their own KPIs and they all have their own mandates and they all work differently.
Really quickly, just sorry, you can come back to that in a moment. But one thing is they often don't communicate horizontally, and
that's why silos are so tough, right?
Yeah, and with Kalicube, I'm seeing that we're fighting that in terms of the way people are working. But what struck me is when I was listening to Gary Ilyash 3 years ago, he was talking about how, in fact, all of these different silos within Google don't talk to each other. We have a tendency to think of Google as this one, or Google search. We're just talking about Google search here, as this one massive kind of object thing where everything's incredibly well intertwined and interconnected and communicating incredibly well. But in fact, it's lots of people, lots of teams dealing with different products like Google My Business, the videos, the different elements that people also ask, the knowledge panel, and so on, and they don't necessarily talk to each other. In fact, they probably don't at all. And then it's all put together in this kind of SERP. So that was just my comment, as it struck me as how naive we are to think that these teams are talking to each other. And it's actually just an amalgam of different blocks that the SERP is putting together. I can't
even tell you the hundreds of brands that you would be, astonished that I've had the privilege of working with, and seeing inside their organizations. And unfortunately, seeing the dysfunction that lives within them, not in the way they each go to market. They have phenomenal people. What they don't have is they don't have a cohesive strategy to break across silos, right? And that becomes tremendously difficult for an SEO, because an SEO is essence has to try and convince, you might not say that social traditionally is convinced, or that display might be, or that affiliate, or many of the other things I think would be in the SERP that you'd want to take into account, bring that information back to a team and say, hey, I have something that can help you. And I have many strategies, frankly, of being an evangelist of SEO on how to do that correctly. But what I found is these organizations are not structured that way. Now, the opposite I was saying, which is the Jack and Jills of all trade, meaning SEO is one of the many things they are now tasked with, even though they also do display, they also do paid, they also do the other aspects of marketing, right? Those individuals using the data from search, trying to then implement it in other places, they're hard pressed enough to do one of their jobs correctly, let alone start trying more advanced aspects of, if I take this supply and I feed it back in compared to the demand, can I actually start to change the face of our brand? As well as, unfortunately, companies do not spend on their brand the way they should. Now they're happy to spend on it for Super Bowl advertising, right, Jason? They're happy to go run an ad and hope, right? What we call spray and pray, right? They put an ad in Yankee Stadium on a billboard, a digital billboard, and they're like, well, I hope that guy is really interested in buying a fridge. And, as a brand, that may or may not land. It may be just one of those repetitive things. Notice I do this. Repetitive things that you have to show your brand 8 times before someone takes an action. But what's funny is we don't actually consider that part of the play when we think of supply in the SERP, and then actually having your brand confirmed, not by you, right, but by third parties, trusted third parties, is incredibly valuable.
And once again, yeah, absolutely. But and one thing I think we also fail to realize or forget maybe is that Google is a trusted third party. We use Google because we trust its results, or at least we think they're better than perhaps Microsoft or DuckDuckGo, or whatever it might be. But that idea is that when Google shows a set of results, it's saying, here is my recommended list of best answers to your question or best solutions to your problem. And that recommendation, it's an implicit recommendation. But as Google users, we accept that, and as marketers, we forget that as users, we are trusting Google and we're taking its advice.
Yes, I mean that's the whole point. Is even in my saying, in the SEO space of SEO products, if a new one is shown to me, I still look back and go, it might be a flaw in my knowledge, not their rankings, right? I don't assume, and so that's what's so amazing is that we're all consumers of this amazing set of data. We use it for so much of our lives, and yet we don't turn around as a business and use that in a more efficient way. When you think about this, I'm always shocked at how many product teams are not using search data and actually search results to define the features, functionalities, and issues their customers are having. They're happy to go out into their client base and ask questions, and figure out problems, but they don't actually go and see how the market itself is actually speaking about the topic and the concerns and the things. I want to know a Reddit page is showing up about noise canceling versus noise reduction and that aspect, right?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things that Tom Critchlow touched on this a few weeks ago about how much data we have, how much information and insights we have, and that the other teams would do well, or we would do well to convince them or encourage them to use that data and to look to us for that data, because we're the central source of this astonishing set of data. But the other thing is that makes me obviously talk about brand SERPs, is products have brand SERPs. Yes. It's an entity SERP. It's the result for that product. And if you're saying, well, the Quora pages ranking, then Google thinks that is important, relevant, and helpful to the audience of that product. Same for people also ask, same for videos, same for the knowledge panel, same for all the results on that product SERP, the brand SERP in my vocabulary. And for me, it's a massive, massive miss, because Google's done the market research and it's showing you what it thinks is most highly relevant, helpful, and valuable to that audience. What do you think of that?
I mean, you're dead on. I
think. I've got a career ahead of me.
I promise you didn't pay me to say that, but in the reality of this is, I can't tell you how frequently I used to, and in dealing with keywords and tracking and things like that, people would say to me, "I don't want to track my brand terms. I don't want," and much of that had to do with paying, right? I don't want to pay for keywords that I think I should rank for anyway. And I'd say to them, "Well, hold on a second. Do you show up for all 10 of your results in the brand?" I mean, not necessarily. In fact, less now than ever before, right? Brand is often seen as navigational, but it's also, sometimes it's navigational, but sometimes it's informational. So sometimes individuals are actually trying to find coupon and code. And I was telling Jason this the other day, I actually had a product I was looking at where I thought I would buy it. It was for myself personally. It was 4 times more expensive per month than the original product I was using. and I went and looked their brand up, and this will date me as to when I did it. I looked the name of the brand up, and I found them, and I went onto their site, and I started filling out a form, and I didn't even think about this, but then the form showed me one of the fill outs said, coupon code. And so I'm like, well, I'm not an idiot. I'm going to go look up their name plus coupon code. And while I did that, and they showed up number 1 for themselves, guess what? A Google Plus page showed up number 2. That dates me now. Yeah, and on the Google Plus page was an entire litany of first someone talking about it, and then about their product. It wasn't very, I mean, they did a great rundown of why not to go with their product, but then 15 other people chimed in. Now, there's someone in that company going like, I don't understand it. I have a form fill out that gets opened a lot, but it sure doesn't get a lot of completes.
Right.
And it's because they haven't tied back the experience of the user to actually what they're going through. The user will go back. You've offered me this idea. Had I been smart, which I'm not, but had I been smart, I probably would have done coupon code at the beginning. I just didn't assume they had coupon codes. But this concept of the user will go through a process when purchasing, a process when building a relationship with your company. They will consume the supply. The supply will influence their demand. That's what's so interesting is people aren't realizing that, and they're not building their businesses or moreover their websites. They've started to build their websites with demand in mind, right? We realize that people are actually looking for a 325i red BMW. So we know we need pages that actually go all the way down to that level so that if you were to search them, you can enter that way. The question is the business actually thinking, I don't actually offer that product? Should I be offering that product because people are searching for it? You take it all the way back to the beginning, the true supply, which is, will you build your business in accordance of the demand being shown in the market? Now, they'll say, no, that doesn't happen. That demand is really built on how we get feedback from our clients, on market research, well, why is this not part of your market research? Why is this not a huge aspect of how you consider who the players are, who the competitors are? Because guess what? Sorry, I froze there. Guess what? People will go, they will consume, and they will have a conversation with Google. The question is whether or not you'll be a part of it, not just with your website, but everywhere you can be.
Yeah, no, I like that. They will have a conversation with Google is a delightful way of putting it. And one thing that then leads me on to is, I mean, you've talked about basically saying, look for the demand and chase it, let's say. But as an economist, when I was back there in Liverpool years and years ago, far too long for me to mention it, and my white beard gives it away, way before Google Plus, one of the phrases that stuck in my mind was supply creates its own demand. And the example was Margaret Thatcher building the M25. And they built it and they predicted on current situations. And within a month, it was already just completely full of traffic jams. And what had happened is that the fact that they built it meant that more people wanted to use it, and they didn't factor in that supply creates its own demand. Can you map that into your amazing analogy? To see if, this is the trick question. I really do apologize, but it just
no. It's perfect. It's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine. I mean, all right. So let me think through that for a second.
Right. Okay. In the meantime, I'll just keep talking to fill in the gaps so that we don't have the terrible gaps in the audio podcast.
Oh no, don't worry. Okay, so this is where Jason's really. If you smell burning, folks, he's gotten my gears turning to a high.
I'm sorry, I feel guilty now.
No, don't feel guilty at all. This is a good thing. Anyone who doesn't challenge and make people think that's not a good conversation. So let's think about this. So basically, what we're saying is that the supply itself creates the demand. So I guess what you consume in Google, right, ultimately can give you an opinion, which can then lead to a need for something. So I've always said people have a need they know and a need they don't know. Right. So what happens is, and I try to explain this to folks when they're thinking about how to create content. Are you creating content for the problem you know your customer needs? Are you creating content above that to inform them that they may have a problem that then could be solved through these mechanisms, right? So the idea then is when you consume a piece of content that informs you that you may have a problem, right? Attrition within your company. So you're a CMO, or no, you're a CFO, and you're worried about attrition. The Great Resignation is impacting your business right now. And so you go and you say ways to reduce attrition in my company. And all of a sudden, you're given this litany of potential opportunities in an article. They talk about better benefits. They talk about products that can create customer loyalty or employee loyalty. They talk about a few different methods. That sets off a demand from what was ultimately a supply, which was that article sets off many ships of potential queries that now go out and introduce people to potential brands, potential subject matters, and potential aspects.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant off the cuff there. And the other thing is,
it took me a second. In all fairness, I can't just but I hope it landed. I mean, that's a reasonable way to kind of follow that.
But we can move that forwards even further and say that with Google's educational moments, with the people also asking so on and so forth, that once you start down a new rabbit hole like that, Google's going to drag you down the rabbit hole even further. And I mean, just to end, and what I've just realized is that what I've done with Brand SERPs and Kalicube Pro, I've created a supply for which there is no demand. I'm sure people need it, but now I've just realized I'm in a situation where I'm hoping that it is true that supply creates its own demand. Thank you so much, Stephan. That was the most enlightening and delightful conversation. We're going to quickly introduce next week, passing the baton traditionally. Next week, we've got Tom Shapiro, Rethink Lead Generation. I've never thought about lead generation, so I'm not going to be rethinking it. I'm going to be thinking it for the first time with Tom. Could you pass the baton, Stephan?
Sure. So I am passing the baton to Tom Shapiro of StrataBeat. I have actually heard wonderful things about him, have not had the chance to meet him. So Tom, this is a call out to you to reach out to me so we could have a conversation. But nonetheless, be sure to tune in next week for the wonderful Tom Shapiro. And if you want more of me, check out StephanBajaio.com.
Brilliant, wonderful. Thank you so much. Anton, can I just call you back? I'll do the quick goodbye. A quick goodbye to end the show. Thank you, Stephan. Now, I wanted to just call Anton back because he's still there, and I'm really happy that Anton's still there.
Me too.
We're in the middle of a war in Kyiv. You managed to stick around for 40 minutes. I'm so happy that you're still here. I love you, man. I'm giving you a big, big, big hug. And I've said it publicly live on air. One of my favorite people in the entire universe. Thank you, man.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
Thank you, Anton, for everything you do for our industry. You're amazing. I really can't tell you enough. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephan.
Right. Thank you, everyone, for watching. I'm going to leave you with this screen. Please do help. And if you've helped already, if you've donated already, if you've gone to a protest already, please do that again and again and again. And remember, our friends are in Ukraine right now, defending their freedom. Let's help them. Stand with Ukraine. Thank you very much.